Well, good to be here tonight. Appreciate Brother John taking care of last Wednesday night, and appreciate everybody praying for everybody who's been sick. We certainly hated to miss and not be here, but certainly we like that we were able to watch the services even though we were at home. Let's turn to Nehemiah chapter 6. Nehemiah chapter 6. Tonight, we're going to talk about Nehemiah's discernment. Nehemiah's discernment and wisdom. Now, when we looked at chapter 5 a couple of weeks ago, we were able to see more troubles that they experienced in the work. The troubles last time that we talked about really had to do a lot with money. It had to do with families that were in rough spots because the men were down building the walls, and families were running out of money, and families were selling everything that they could to buy food, and they were even giving of their own selves, their own lives, and their children to giving them to service so that they could work to earn anything that they could get. Folks were taking advantage of those people. It's wrong to take advantage of people. You don't do anybody a benefit by swooping in their time of need and taking advantage of them. And so Nehemiah had to rebuke some of the elders, had to rebuke some of those that were responsible for that. And then at the end of chapter 5, Nehemiah gave his own testimony, how through his own selflessness and unselfishness, he set the example for people. Okay, and that's good. It's always good that if you do have to rebuke someone, if you have to tell someone that they're doing wrong, it's helpful to be able to show them what to replace that with. Telling them that it's wrong, tell them that's wrong, that this is actually the better way. This is how you ought to treat people. And Nehemiah was able to use his own example for that. Tonight, in looking at more troubles, the enemy is back up to their tricks. So the troubles that we'll see tonight do not come again from internal issues, but actually come from the enemy again. And we're going to be able to see Nehemiah's discernment and wisdom and how he deals with that. Number one, let's first talk about a sneaky meeting. A sneaky meeting. In verse number 1, Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1. Now it came to pass, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arabian, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me. Now you get to this point, Nehemiah chapter 6, and apparently the walls are almost finished. In fact, it says there in verse number 1 that there was no breach left therein. So they had actually plugged all the gaps. They had fixed the gaps in the wall all around the city. Now, he does mention there that he hadn't quite yet set up the doors upon the gates. So it's not 100% finished, but it's almost finished. They've done a lot of the hard work so far. But that also tells us that now the enemy has to go into critical mode, because now when you read the truth of verse number 1, now it's now or never, right? This wall's almost done. These guys are about to finish this. If we're going to stop them, it's now or never. And it tells us there in verse 2 that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. Now this is strange. Sanballat and the enemies here, they haven't wanted to meet with Nehemiah up to this point. Wonder what's going on. They don't relay what it is that they want to meet about. They don't tell you what it is they want to talk about. Maybe it was a friendly meeting, you think? Maybe they want to reconcile. Maybe they want to just give Nehemiah a vacation. Maybe just give him a little time to relax. No, it tells us there at the end of verse number 2 that they thought to do me mischief. Nehemiah was able to see through the outward appearance, and he was able to see that what they proposed would ultimately result in his harm. You don't get a lot of details about it. They want to meet. They want to take him out of the city. They want to meet in one of the villages. And it almost appears like they come innocently. But Nehemiah is able to see through that. And that's what discernment is. Discernment is the ability to judge matters according to God's view as opposed to a general outward appearance. Okay? That's what discernment is. We talked about discernment in Sunday school when we looked in 1 John, and we talked about how John gave us keys and clues how to discern truth from error. But the ability to see through things and how they may appear on the surface and actually really be able to wisely discern things. The Bible tells us, of course, that God is, as all wise, God is great at that, right? We have examples in the Scripture. Of course, I think of the passage in 1 Samuel where it talks about the kings, the nation of Israel wanting to set up Saul as their king. And you guys know why the children of Israel wanted to set up Saul as their king, right? Well, we want to have a king like all the other nations have. But when they chose Saul, they liked that Saul stood head and shoulders above everyone else. This is a king that could lead us into war. This is a king that could lead us into battle. A king that could strike fear into the hearts of our enemies. And yet the Bible tells us that as God was able to look at Saul and able to look at David, and in the comparison there, the Bible tells us that God looks on the heart while man looks at the outward appearance. In the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 27, in the book of Proverbs chapter 27, we are given a verse here that if you're not discerning and if you're not wise, these things sound like they're backwards, right? Proverbs 27 and verse number 6, the Bible says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." Now, if you're not wise in discerning, guys, that sounds backwards. You know, you would think that faithful are the wounds of a friend. Well, if he wounded me, how can he be my friend? If he hurt my feelings, if he did something, how could he be my friend? Then it says, the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Well, how can he be my enemy if he's being so kind, if he's being so generous, if he's being so helpful? If you're not wise and you're not discerning, these things might seem backwards. But to the wise, there is understanding that the wounds of a friend are far more helpful than the deceitful kisses of an enemy. Now, it takes wisdom, it takes discernment to see and to understand those things. Nehemiah is really, really good at this. Nehemiah is good at not being fooled at how things look on the surface. And Sanballat and his buddies come and they propose a meeting. You know, hey, the wall's almost done. What it is that they propose to discuss during this meeting, we're not really told. But Nehemiah is able to discern right off that these guys are up to no good. These guys are planning some kind of mischief. And that's important to develop that kind of discernment. How do believers, how do we develop discernment? Well, you know, of course, because God is wise, because God is all wisdom, we become more discerning as we get more in tune with God's Word. Learn what God has to say on subjects, and you'll be more discerning on those. Sometimes it's a matter of maturity, right? Through spiritual maturity, you grow and learn to be more discerning. Just like the book of Hebrews tells us, you know, that as a babe desires, you know, one thing and one thing only, as someone develops, as they mature, and they're ready to take on more, so it is with us in our decision-making, wisdom and discernment that we can have in life. And you can always ask. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. He gives to all men liberally. God's not sitting up in heaven with a bucket of wisdom that if you ask for it, he's going to be like, I don't know. That's one of the things that he enjoys to give. It's one of the things that he enjoys to give his children is wisdom. All right, let's look at our text here, Nehemiah chapter 6. So Nehemiah is able to discern that they mean to do him mischief. Verse 3, it says, "And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you?" Nehemiah won't be distracted, right? No matter what it is they want to talk about, no matter what it is that they want to meet about, as intent as he is in understanding these guys are up to no good. They got some kind of mischief brewing. His response to them was that, you know what, I'm involved in a good work. We are doing something good here. I'm not going to stop this work. Why would I stop this to come and meet with you? The people are working too hard. We're almost near completion. Why, in verse number 3, should the work cease while I leave it and come down to you? Okay. If our enemy can get us distracted, right, so that we stop working, so that we stop working as hard as we can, so that we lose focus on what is important, then he's won. And Nehemiah doesn't even let it get to that. No matter what it is they want to talk about, what it is they're trying to do to distract him, nope, I'm not coming down off this wall. This work is too great. It's too important a job for me to get distracted and go wander off doing something else. Why, he says in verse 3, should it cease while I leave it and come down to you? Find something that's important and be engaged and be involved in it and try not to be distracted. And that's good practice for us. Now, that doesn't mean that the enemy won't be persistent. Okay? Verse number 4 tells us, "Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner." The enemy is persistent, right? Temptation is persistent. The temptation to be distracted, to stop, to engage in something else, to fall away, those things attack all the time, right? And we're going to have to learn to stand and stand strong repeatedly. The enemy doesn't give up on us when we say no, or when we stay focused and don't get distracted. We count on the fact that the enemy is going to likely come at us again. Focus and determination is going to be something that will be challenged. We have to stay dedicated and faithful to the work that God has called us to do. This is something that, small victories here and there, where we're able to stay focused and stay determined. We need those, and hopefully they help us to build upon each other, because victories aren't always long-lasting. The enemy comes again and again, and Nehemiah says that these guys kept coming back, and they kept coming back, trying to distract me, trying to get me to stop. And yet it says in verse 4 that I answered them after the same manner. Keep that kind of focus, right? Persistence. Let the persistence be on both sides. Do not let this world wear you down. If you're involved in a good work, if you're serving the Lord, if you really count that you are faithful to Christ, don't let the persistence of the enemy wear you down. Don't get to the point where it's like, well, they're just not going to stop unless I give in. No, they're probably not. But don't let that make you give in. You keep a determined focus to stay faithful, keep serving the Lord, keep being involved in that work, whatever it is. If it's the work of the Lord, keep at it. Keep serving Him in spite of this distraction here. So that's the first thought there, that this sneaky meeting. Whatever Sanballat and his buddies have conjured here, Nehemiah knows that they're up to no good, and it's likely just an effort to distract him and get him off the wall so that the work will cease. And he's not going to fall for it. No matter how many times they try, 4 times, 5 times, however many times, he keeps giving the same answer. I'm not coming down off the wall. This is too important for me to stop. All right, number 2, a slanderous accusation. In verse number 5, it says this, Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand, wherein was written, It is reported among the heathen, and Gashmu saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou walk, that thou mayest be their king, according to these words. Now this is a lie, but obviously their first attempt to get him off the wall, to try and trick him into a meeting, just to try to distract him, slow down the work, get it to stop for a while, that didn't work. Now they're just lying. Nehemiah had no intentions of rebelling. You remember from the early chapters of this book the heart that he had and the amount of prayer that he engaged in before he could even go to his king and ask for permission. He has no intent of setting himself up as a king, setting himself up as the ruler of the Jews. But that's what's happening here in verse 5 and 6. You know, people are saying, and they drop names, right? Gashmu, and it's written, it's reported among the heathen, and so over here saying, and the people are talking, Nehemiah, and they're talking about how you kind of propping yourself up here to be king among this people, like you're planning a revolt when this is all done. It's awfully vague, right? These people are saying, people are talking, and it's lies. Our enemy knows that those kind of attacks wear on us. These are the attacks that wear on people. There is nothing worse than being lied about. There's nothing worse than having our motives challenged, especially when they're pure, when they're right, when we're trying to serve and when we're trying to be faithful. And here you've got these guys that are lying about them and challenging their motives. It's hard because what is our initial reaction? What is our basic instinct in that? It's to defend ourselves. Nobody likes to be lied about, do they? No one likes to think that people are talking and behind closed doors people are saying things about you. Nehemiah, these people know what you're up to. People are questioning you. People think that you're going to rebel. People think that you're propping yourself up as a king. It paralyzes us sometimes to worry and think about what other people say and think. Now, I'm going to say this. I think I realize that it would be foolish for me to just stand here and say, oh, you just have to get over it. You should never care what people think. That's not realistic. That's not who we are. That's not how we're built or how we're made. It would help if we were better at that, sure. But it hurts to be lied about. And I'm glad that you young people don't know anything about this yet. But I have to let you know that the day is coming when some of the things that will eat at your mind more than anything else is worrying about what people think. And worry, so-and-so's saying this or so-and-so's thinking this. And you're going to agonize in your mind. Did I really say that? Do they really think that about me? What could I have done different? Why do they feel this way about me? And those are some of the hardest things that we deal with in our own mind, are how we terrorize ourselves by what other people think and what other people are saying about us. Now, in this passage, you have people that are just out and out lying. There's absolutely no truth to this. It doesn't change the fact that those things hurt, those things bother you. Now, in verse number 7, It says, thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah, and now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. Nehemiah, we're going to tell. We're going to tell on you. It's going to be reported to the king. You've set yourself up prophets. You're planning to set yourself up as king. You are planning a rebellion. And it says there in verse 7, now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. And by making that threat, they think they're going to get Nehemiah down off the wall, don't they? It says there at the end of verse 7, come now therefore, and let us take counsel. Come on, we got to talk about this. People are talking about you. People are saying these things. They're going to tell the king, won't you come on down so we can talk about this and get this settled? Now, in verse number 8 it says, then I said unto them, saying, there are no such things done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. He calmly called them the liars that they were. For they all made us afraid. He understood from the beginning that this was the attempt. They are saying these things to make us afraid, to get us in fear to stop or to listen, saying their hands shall be weakened from the work that it not be done. If we can scare them, they'll slow down, they'll stop. Now he prays in verse 9, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. Nehemiah knew that they were trying to scare them, that it was about fear, because fear paralyzes people. It does bother us when people are talking about us. It does bother us when we feel like we have been lied about, like our reputation has been tarnished, that, you know what, I want to say something, I got to do something to restore my name, or, you know, I've got to combat these lies, I've got to defend my honor. And fear of our, you know, name, or fear of what people think, fear of what people say, paralyzes us. Now it's here we learn that people talk. People will talk. If you serve Christ and if you live for the Lord, there will always be people who will talk. In the book of Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11, it says, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Well, we got an example of that right here in Nehemiah, right? That they do that. They lie. They revile. They say things that aren't true. They speak evil against. And the Lord says, you can actually expect that. That's how they do people that are faithful. That's how they do people that are doing right at times. People will talk about us. We are going to worry about what people say about us. We're going to worry about what people think of us. You say, Brother Philip, how do I overcome that? It terrorizes me. It bothers me. I overanalyze everything. It eats at my mind all the time, what people think of me or what people are saying about me. Well, I don't know all that you can do, but I do have a couple of scriptures that I think will be a help to you. I think they'll be a help to any of us as we worry about those things. In the book of 1 Peter, in the book of 1 Peter, and in chapter 2, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse number 12, the Bible tells us, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak evil, or they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. You can't stop doing right despite what people say. Okay? If men speak evil of you, you still live right. You still live in such a manner that they can behold your good works. And our prayer is that through that, through faithfulness, through a faithful dedication, through righteous living, through what we can do on behalf of Christ, through faithfulness and living right, that men will see that. You know, are they going to say things? Well, apparently in verse number 12, yeah, apparently they do. They speak against us as evildoers. But that can't keep us from living right before them. Okay? We have to be better than sinking to that level and engaging in mudslinging and in trying to ruin someone else's reputation because they ruined ours. And listen, when they speak against us as evildoers, we live right before them. Let them see that we are faithful and that we are living right. When somebody says something about us, or someone thinks that we're in the wrong, or someone thinks that we're living wrong, or they make an accusation, he says, you live right. Let them see it. Let them see it with their own eyes, that what they've said is incorrect. Now, a sister verse to that is in a chapter over. 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 16, it says, having a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you, as of evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. The goal is that men and women of Christ would live faithfully and live to such an extent that when we are spoken of as evildoers, when people do say things about us, they are the ones that walk away ashamed instead of us. You say, how does that work? How does that happen? It's called this. It's called benefit of the doubt. It's called living in such a way that when somebody says, you know what I heard about Brother John? I heard he's doing this. And did you hear that he said this? And you live in such a way that when I hear that, I think, you know what? That don't sound like Brother John. That don't sound like him at all. He doesn't talk like that. He doesn't do those kind of things. And you live in such a way that when they speak evil of you, they are the ones that end up ashamed. You know why? Because wise thinking people and discerning people and people that try to honor God in their thinking are careful to those things that they hear. Now listen, there will always be people that like gossip and they like to spread a juicy story. And so there will probably always be people that will believe any negative thing that is told to them about you. In fact, if they think you're a goody two-shoes, they can't wait to hear something that sounds negative. That's how some people are. But wise people and discerning and godly thinking people filter what comes in. And when they hear things about you, and when talk is about you and things that you've said and things that you've done, you live in such a way that people stop and think, what? No, that can't be right. And it says there, have a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you as of evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. Now, I can't tell you to never worry about what people think. I don't think that that's realistic, but I do think that the Bible helps us. It's honest with us that people are obnoxious, and people like gossip, and people like to talk, and people will say things. People lie. People lie. It makes people, I don't know why it's this way, but it makes some people feel good to cut other people down. I don't know why it's that way, but it's that way. But you live, according to 1 Peter chapter 2, you don't resort to those tactics. When you're spoken evil of, you live in such a way that they get to see your good works. And then in 1 Peter chapter 3, you also live in such a way that to those that are godly thinking, to those that are discerning, they'll hear those things and they'll think, well, that's not true. That can't possibly be true. And you've lived in such a way that when people talk, they're the ones that end up ashamed. Okay? That's the goal. You can't stop people from talking about you. And you're probably going to worry about it at times in your life. But what you can do is attempt to live in such a way that whatever evil is spoken of you is quickly discarded. You know, there are people that I look at, and I can honestly say I would give them the benefit of the doubt. If you told me something about them, I would either think, no, there's no way. There's no way. They don't talk like that. They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't do that. Or I might believe that they did it, but I would think, if they did that, they were having a bad day, because that is not them. That is not their character. That's how I want to live before people. There are other people that if you were to tell me something about them, I'm probably going to believe it, even if it's not true, because somewhere in my mind is the thought that, yep, that's them. That's their character. That's their nature. That's the testimony or the reputation they have. That's the harm in not living right before men, is that if something is said or somebody does say something, even if it's not true, people could tend to have a tendency to believe it. Our goal, our attempt is to live in such a way that we get the benefit of the doubt from wise, discerning people. You won't get it from everybody, but to people that matter to you, to people that are wise and discerning people, you live in such a way that you do have that benefit of the doubt. All right? Nehemiah realized that. He was not going to be governed by what these people thought, and he called them out, and he says that you're trying to scare my people. And he prayed the Lord, strengthen my hands. Lord, don't let the people give in. I know people are talking trash. I know that they're threatening to take word back to the king with these lies. But Lord, just strengthen our hands. Help us to stay focused on doing what's right. Don't let us quit and give in to these. Now, thirdly, let's look quickly here at this last point, a secret threat. Verse 10, it says, afterward I came unto the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabeel, who was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night will they come to slay thee. Now, whoever this man is here, you read verse number 10, and he's trying to create fear within Nehemiah. And he tells them they're going to come and they're going to slay you. And he comes under the pretense of safety, right? You know, why don't you let's go into the temple. Let's go into the house of God and we'll hide you there. What he's attempting to do, though, is to get Nehemiah to give in through fear. The enemy knows how to work this, right? The enemy knows how to talk. He knows how to present it real well. You know, boy, man, the safest place you'll be is if you come over here into the house of God. But Nehemiah knows that's giving into fear. That's taking, that's just going too far. And Nehemiah knows that he cannot live his life afraid of every word that was said. He cannot live his life afraid of everything that the enemy thought and everything that the enemy said. And so in verse 11 he said, and I said, should such a man as I flee? Nehemiah is like, I've encouraged the people to stand. I have encouraged the people through all this not to give up, not get down off the wall, not quit working. But you're telling me that I should get down. You're telling me that under the name of safety or under the eyes of protection, I'm supposed to come down off the wall and quit working? When I've challenged the people to stay and to work? So he says, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that, being as I am, would go in the temple to save his life? I will not go in. The enemy knew how to try and trap him, but Nehemiah stood bravely and courageously said, I'm not coming down. You can come under whatever guise you want to, call it safety, call it protection, but if I come down off this wall and show fear, What about all these other people that I've told not to fear? And I've told them to trust God. And I've told them to believe. And I've told them to have faith. And I've told them to grab a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. But then I'm going to go and run and hide. And I'm going to do what I can to save my neck. You know, this is a great leader. He doesn't just preach it to people. He practices it himself, right? He's encouraged people. He's told them to have faith. He's told them to stand on that wall if they had to stand there with a sword. And he's like, I'm not going to run and hide from that. I'm not, in verse 11, I will not go in. And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. There's where the discernment comes in. He could tell that this man had come to him, and he did not truly come in care and concern for Nehemiah. He came to scare Nehemiah off the wall. They'll kill you. They're going to come and get you one night. You better come in the temple and hide. And Nehemiah was wise to what he was doing. He wasn't trying to protect Nehemiah. He was trying to get him off the wall. Now, this is where you have to cultivate that discernment, because if you're not wise and if you're not discerning, verse 10 didn't sound like that, right? Verse 10 sounded like protection. Verse 10 sounded like help. But Nehemiah knows he's just trying to get me down off this wall. He's made it sound really good. He's made it sound like my life is in danger and that there's a threat there and that I'd be better off by stopping, getting down off the wall and going to hide. But he's like, no, this isn't the word of the Lord. These people have hired him. That's what they're trying to do. That's what it means to cultivate discernment, is to be able to look beyond the surface, be able to look above just an outwardly view of things and really get into the heart of the matter and say, is this right? Is this good for me? Is this right for me to do? And verse 13 says, therefore was he hired that I should be afraid and do so and sin. And they might have matter for an evil report, that they might reproach me. Now, what do you think would have happened the minute that Nehemiah got down off that wall and went into the temple to hide? Guess who would have been right there at the walls? Guess who would have been right there to say, where's Nehemiah? Oh, you guys got swords and trowels, right? You guys are working. You guys are working under risk of life and risk of persecution and risk, of threat. Wonder where Nehemiah went. Oh, he went to save his own skin, right? He's going to leave you guys out here to work under threat and maybe give your lives, but where's he at? Of course, he's hiding. Nehemiah is able to sniff right through that. And verse 10 sounded real good and sounded real pretty, and Nehemiah knows these guys are trying to cultivate a plan where they get me off the wall and they try to bring this whole thing down. And he's wise to it. My God, verse 14, think thou upon Tobiah and Sanballat according to these their works, and on the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets that would have put me in fear. Lord, I know what they're up to, and I want you to intervene, or I want you to consider and work in this situation. They are trying through fear to stop this work. Nehemiah left Persia and came to Jerusalem to build these walls because he felt that it was the call of God. He felt this was the work that God had set before him to do. And we have seen through every temptation, through every struggle, whether it be external or internal, and now through very direct personal things said to him, threats, they are trying to stop this work. But Nehemiah feels that this is the work God has called him to do. And to be faithful and to be focused in this work is more important than anything else to him. And though men would try to make him afraid, and though people here in chapter 6 now are just running their mouths and they're lying and they're threatening, he's able to say, Lord, strengthen our hands. Lord, they're just trying to make us afraid. And he's able to see through it. He knew what God had called him to do. And because he had confidence in the work God had given him to do, he was going to stay faithful and dedicated. You know, that's why it's important for us to know that we are engaged in the work of the Lord, to know that what we're involved in is a good work, it's a worthwhile work, it's the work of the Lord that will help us when those temptations come, when those threats come, when those attempts to get us to stop come. You know, if we're fickle, if we're wishy-washy, I mean, if we're just here hanging out, right? Let's talk about our mission work. If it's just, if it's just something that we do, if it's just a fun place to hang out, if it's a nice change of pace from what we were used to, when real threat, when real persecution, when real words and thoughts come, those kind of things aren't going to carry us through. This thing being a novelty for us isn't going to carry us through. We have to know that we are engaged in the work of the Lord, that what we are doing is a good work, that what we are doing is a right work. Those are the things that will carry us through. Those are the things that will keep us going when it gets hard, right? When we find some adversaries, when we find some rejection, when we find some stumbling blocks in the way. Those are the things that will keep us going. We have to know we are engaged in the right work. This is the work God has called us to do. You can see that because Nehemiah had that focus. He's not coming down off that wall. And it doesn't matter what you say about him. It doesn't even matter if you personally threaten him. He knew, I'm engaged in the right work. And how can I come down off this wall? After all that I've preached, after all that I've said, after all that I've encouraged in other people, how could I stop? Right? And if we're going to talk to other people about being faithful, and if we're going to encourage people to stand and do what's right and be faithful and be involved in the work of the Lord, how could we do any less, right? How could we not stand in the face of trouble or in the face of whatever lies ahead and do anything less than be faithful ourselves? Nehemiah is a very wise and very good leader. And it started with his focus and determination that God gave him this work to do. All right? All right, we're out of time. Let's go ahead and stand. We're going to be dismissed tonight with a word of prayer.